Welcome everyone to episode 3 of 6 vulnerable conversations between 2 women. And I love it because right now we are 2 women traveling the world. I'm in Hawaii right now. And Jamie, where are you?
San Diego.
San Diego, beautiful. I love that we are able to continue this commitment to vulnerable conversations no matter where we are. It's a beautiful thing. And the past couple of weeks, last week we got into the dark side of the goddess movement. And before that, we got in the week before we spoke on the role of victim archetype in romantic relationships. And I really witness us kind of peeling back the veil to these conversations that hold so much charge and simultaneously so much juice and so much freedom. And today, we are going to be talking about power, surrender, and releasing control. And I know for myself, this one, again, holds a lot of weight because allowing myself to let go of control and create space for whether it's men or universal energy to create an experience that I myself could not have planned through my desire to kind of like contort and force and effort has been an ever-evolving practice. And let's see, I'd love for you to share a little bit about your relationship to this topic, Jamie.
Yes, it's been an evolving practice for me as well. I have spent one of the biggest journeys of my life in personal development has been in letting go of control. And it's been really challenging for me. So it's something I really enjoy speaking about because as I continue to let go of more control, more magic happens. And I'm consistently surprised, delighted, and inspired by both the events in my life and the way that people show up, specifically men. And that's one thing we're going to be talking about here today. So it's a very fascinating experiment for me of letting go of trying to make things happen and thinking that I can do things better, and is shifting my personal paradigm from being one of fairness and it must be done the best way to really relaxing and getting to enjoy my experience of surrendering and being in my feminine when I allow someone else to take over, even if they're a little bit sloppy with it sometimes, and really giving like that grace.
Thank you so much. Before we dive into the different aspects of this topic, you mentioned the word magic, and it's a word like so many of these buzzwords right now that can have so many different connotations. And I get the sense that our definitions of magic are similar in a sense, and it's a part of what draws us together. And I'd love to share like what my feeling of magic is and like why this power and then being able to release control and surrender is a key element of experiencing this magic. So for me, I feel that magic is the experience of knowing that we are constantly influencing and creating our reality based upon the thoughts and the beliefs and the emotions that we experience around those things and what we transmit into the world. And what I have found is that since we're constantly creating our reality, why not actually do it intentionally in a way that creates something that we are genuinely fulfilled by, whether that is relationship or work or purpose. And what I've found is that the more that I have been able to let go of my fixed controlling agenda, that I know exactly how it's supposed to be done, I know exactly how it's supposed to play out. If I don't do it, nobody else will. It's been through letting go of that attachment to knowing the answer that I have actually created space to invite in experiences that could not have mingled with me if I hadn't released the grip and kind of kept other things at a distance.
Yes, I love what you're saying, and to add, there's an element of being surprised that I really enjoy. And I found for a while, and I see this a lot in working with couples in relationships specifically, is that there's a way in which we know exactly how it's going to go.
Mm.
And there's no magic in that. And if we find ourselves in a situation where we know exactly how it's going to go, there's a chance that we've got our thumb on the forehead of the situation, and we aren't allowing for something new and surprising to occur. And much of the time people get bored, and I found myself being like, oh, this relationship is boring before. And that is coming from my own generation of control of events, people, and the way that I'm reacting, like modulating the way that I'm showing up, such that it's always the same, and there's no fun and play and surprise in that.
Oh my God, I love this conversation because what it's bringing up in me is the realization of, like I had this point of realizing several years ago that I just felt like I could handle men. Like that's just like, oh, like without even like being super aware of it, all of my actions were calculated to facilitate a certain experience that I knew how to create. And what wound up happening, and this is the thing that, I talk to women a lot about, is if we are handling every aspect of a relationship, it's nearly impossible to respect the person that we are in relationship with, because we're operating on the underlying agenda that we know how to do it better than the third that we create in relation to each other. And a big part of the conversation that I have with a lot of women clients who are in relationship is that so much of the time, if we need to be the person in control, we're going to either invite out more femininity, like more surrender in our partner, or attract, if we're heterosexual, men into our lives that have more of a softness, have more of a femininity to them, because they are the complement to the masculinity that we are embodying. So for me, a big part of this path of, surrendering control, because about 3 or 4 years ago, I would describe myself as a woman who was had very like I wouldn't even say masculine qualities, because that implies that there's something wrong with masculine qualities, but kind of ill-expressed forms of the masculine. Like I really wanted to control my surroundings. I was very fixed. Like I was really unwilling to allow for a lot of surprise in my relationships. And most of the men that I attracted into my life, I wanted them to be more like I wanted them to take control. I wanted them to lead. And it's been a process of me realizing I actually need to create the space. It's not just that the man needs to show up differently, because if this is what is happening, I'm playing an integral role in inviting the type of dynamic that I desire. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yes, I would love to talk about creating the space and how we do that. It's so, and through personal experience, I had a boyfriend. I'm thinking of a boyfriend that I had previously, and there was many times where I thought, like, I was very detail oriented, organized, businesswoman since I'm 19, only child. I can handle my shit, right? And that was like an identity. And so he was a little bit more random, and could be a little bit what I felt like was messy. I felt like his leadership wasn't clean enough, and it was messy. And so I would take over, and it would like take him longer. So I would take over and just do it because I got kind of annoyed, or I got impatient. And then he would feel emasculated. and I would feel the same as I always felt, like I had to handle everything and nobody could do anything, right? So it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy and a way to validate this identity of that I always have everything together, because the fear is that I would be out of control and that I would somehow not be taken care of and somehow be unsafe because I allowed someone else to handle something.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like a bit of an irrational fear, but that's like what lived inside. And so through the process of me actually just surrendering and sitting back, I kind of played an experiment with myself. And the experiment was, let him, like, for a week, don't lead anything and just see what happens and support him in however clunky or messy or sloppy I thought that it was. Just let him do it and support that.
Mm.
And something happened in my body that really allowed me to relax into a different place of trust. It was like I sat back in my experience a little bit. And at first it was really challenging. I mean, my my identity and my ideas of how things should go, how things should be a certain way, came out, and that was definitely something for like self-reflection and for me to kind of enter a meditative process about as it's happening and really create the space. And then watching his joy come out as he began to feel like he could actually serve me, because that's what the masculine wants to do for the feminine, is serve and please and provide the space. But I think that so often successful, independent type of women, we have a hard time really allowing them to do that, because we're so used to doing it ourselves, and we have this idea of it must be done right, and it must be done in a certain way, and we want to control that.
Mm. Yep. Yeah, it makes me think of, in my current primary partnership, along with being in relationship, we're also business partners in a capacity. I run a lot of events and workshops around intimacy, and he works production and back of house. And one of the things he always gets on me for is like, he's supposed to handle setting up the chairs. I'm supposed to be just handling like being in myself and in front of the room. But there is this attachment that I have to like handling all of the technical details. And like, it's something that he'll constantly point out to me. And in the moments when like I can feel how much sadness is linked with the surrender. Like there are moments where I really allow myself to touch the surrender in places that I've been holding on so tightly to. Like for me, the biggest story has been like, oh, I need to work hard to prove that I am worthy of the fulfillment that I desire. So that, oh, I need to work hard, for much of my young adult life was what was driving like the vehicle of how I did relationship and how I did work. And as I've been consciously intending to surrender and trust that the powers that be, the universe, the world, the greater power actually has more knowing of what my greatest expression and desires are than I do, that my life unfolds more and more beautifully. And when I let myself let go in these places, especially in relationship with men, because there's been such fear in the past of just like losing connection to myself, that when I feel myself starting to surrender, I just feel this mourning of this way that I feel we as women have been conditioned to believe we need to live in order to be successful in this world and be seen in this world and be valued in this world. You know, something we were talking about before we hopped on this call, Jamie, was we exist in a patriarchal culture. And despite the fact that we are women, we've gone through centuries and generations of women being persecuted for what their expression of power is. which is the intuition, which is the irrational. So in a way, it's allowing ourselves to surrender also requires us to mourn how we've rejected this core aspect of who we are, which is our femininity.
Yeah. Yeah. You're speaking to, it's, and I think something that has happened in many ways is we begin applying this patriarchal paradigm to the way that relationships should be. That there's a model that's been created of like, well, this is how it should be. And also concepts such as fairness, such as things need to be done right, which we were speaking to earlier. And that there's this idea that 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 those paradigms have a higher value than the embodied experience of what it feels like to be in our masculine and feminine together. And that if we are coming from this sort of logical patriarchal paradigms, that we rob ourselves of the experience of really being in full feminine energy or in full masculine energy together. And I do also want to speak to the other side. I feel like men have this, there's this post-feminist movement layer that's we spoke to a little bit last week as well, but that's where men are feeling like, is my masculinity okay? Can I be fully in this? And then women are having, so it's like we're in this dance together of what is okay and how is it supposed to be. And what I'm inviting for all of us here and in my own life continually is, how can I let go of the paradigm of that has been created around relationship and tune into like, what is just the raw desire that lives in my body, that is that the voice has been shut down. It speaks very loudly. It's very hungry when we listen. And sometimes that voice gets drowned out by the voices of the paradigm, the cultural paradigm that we've been in. And so it's been a lot for me about paying attention to how, like, what do I actually want? What is actually going to really serve my experience of myself and my experience of this person that I'm in relationship with, and our relationship. Like, how can I serve that through my desire and letting the desire lead the way instead of the ideas of the way that it should be.
Beautiful. The piece that really stuck out to me, and I was thinking about this also, is, especially with everything that's been going on post Me Too movement, it's like the good men, like the good men who care, who are even more walking on eggshells, because they so have this, like, this is my experience with the male coaching clients that I work with and just the men that I'm in connection with, that there's such a desire to be fully out in their power and yet simultaneously walking on eggshells. One, just because of like their own desire to not be a violator, to not be a part of the problem. And as women, when, we're kind of in the frame of like, oh, well, there's a very particular way to do this, and like, I know how to do it and I want to be right. Or just like, even for me, like, no, even for me knowing like, oh, like he did it this way and it could have been done just a little bit better or differently. My experiences and the partnerships that I've been in and just working with people is that the fear that men have of like doing it wrong. Like there is such this desire to do it right. And how can we as women, even if we're not consciously doing it on purpose, like create a space where men can practice? Like they can actually practice being in the lead. They can actually practice being in their power. And when we're not attached to being right, but instead attached to being connected, and like feeling the desire in this person to meet me, and how can I like fuel and fan that versus cutting it down for not being perfect, I think is a worthy exploration for women.
Yes. Yes, I have an experience that's coming to mind here where it was actually in a coaching call,
Mm.
and she was speaking and said, yeah, I mean, there was some things that I might have liked to do differently. And he immediately jumped in and was like, well, what did you want me to do differently? Like, what are the things, like, wants to know how he can show up better and differently, and is looking for like the feedback. And she jumped on him and was like, I'm talking. And I mean, this is a couple that I'm working with, and it was so interesting for me because I saw myself in that I'm talking, like I'm doing something. And how can we use whatever our skills are? I mean, if you're a woman, use your emotional intelligence to actually support what's happening and what they are actually wanting. So in that moment, as we went back through the interaction, we found a different place, and she where he shared what he was actually doing, and she was like, oh, okay, so I could acknowledge, oh, I'm so glad that you want to help out, but just one moment, I want to finish.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, how can we support one another when we might jump on someone for it not for them not showing up in exactly the way
Yep.
that we want.
Beautiful. And what this is bringing up for me is kind of looking at a deeper level of our relationship to ourself and how we embody and express our personal boundaries. So what I've found is that part of what has us have such like an intense external control of like a no, or like we can kind of kill people with our no, or with our desires, or just what we believe. And what I've found is when we're really hard externally, it's usually because there's lack of awareness or lack of approval for what our yes and what our no is, and insecurity around expressing it in a way that is vulnerable. And what it invites, and I'll speak about the process for me, is that it took a long time for me to just trust myself as a woman, like trust my feelings, that I could trust my feelings, and that it was okay to say no, and that it was okay to say yes, that my desire was okay, and that my no was okay, even if no one in the room understood why I was saying no, that just no is okay. And in order to have the types of relationships that we desire, especially as women, if we desire relationships with strong men, we need to cultivate a strength and a knowingness within ourselves that we know, like, oh, like I've got me. So every time a man doesn't do it exactly how we want to, it doesn't have to be this threat to our entire life. Like, oh my God, this could shatter my experience if this man does not do it exactly how I need it, because I'm so fragile on the inside. Like, we as women need to learn how to work with the fragility that we've been conditioned to believe that we have within us.
Yes. Okay, so I would add something to that because it shows up a little differently for me.
Please.
And how it shows up for me is it's like working with, for me, it's almost been like I've been conditioned to, my experiences, I've been conditioned to be really strong and independent, and not vulnerable. Vulnerability is not a part of my conditioning. And I didn't think that I was sensitive. I actually thought, oh no, I mean it was obvious because I would go home and like have these like experiences that I couldn't have in public that are like of the truth of the sensitivity.
Mm.
And I felt like that was almost conditioned out of me. Like I was conditioned to believe like, you know what, you're not fragile. You're tough. You're a businesswoman. You've got all this whole thing. And meanwhile, inside, I'm sensitive to things. And I have this, like I get hurt so much easier than what people think. It's like, it's a lot easier. I'm a lot more sensitive than what I project. And so my journey has been about closing that gap, and allowing myself to bring that sensitivity and vulnerability into more public situations and into relationship, and bring it in a way that I might not normally do, for, you know, what you spoke to of not feeling safe to like share that in public, or to share that with my partner. And I don't really know where I'm going with that, but that's how it shows up for me, is there's a there's like a sensitivity that when I go into it, it calls, I found that it actually calls someone into being, and has a man show up for me in a way that like feels like an opportunity, instead of me trying to be tough and just pretend like I don't, like it doesn't matter, like I'm untouchable or impenetrable in some way. And so yeah.
The thing that it's bringing up for me is and this, I don't think this is just this is a human being thing, that not like vulnerability and weakness are not synonymous. Like vulnerability is actually a deeply courageous like act of pure power. And there is a difference between surrendering and giving up. And it also feels related to, there's a difference between fragility and sensitivity. And these are subtle distinctions. But it's like for women, when we've been so conditioned to feel like we need to be strong in order to make it in this world, how do we learn how to lead with our sensitivity, lead with our intuition, lead with our intuition, like with our tenderness, and trust ourselves and our experience in such a way that that is our power, and that it is felt in a very grounded and real and tangible way.
Yes, I got to practice this last night, and I had a moment where, you know, we were standing, and I wanted to sit, and it was one of those moments where I could make it happen and just be like, let's go sit down, or I could let the man that I'm with, that I'm seeing, lead that process. And it feels vulnerable for me to not actually, to not make it happen, but to rather be in kind of that place of like, oh wow, you know, my feet kind of hurt. I'd love to sit down and just be there. And he's like, oh yeah, let's go over here. And walks me over, and we sit down, and I'm like, oh gosh, it's funny because it feels really good, and it's also vulnerable, because if he didn't do that, then what would I do? You know, it's like then what position would I be in? Would I hint again? Would I just go make it happen? Who knows? I mean, it you know, it arises in the moment. And it's interesting looking from this place of like, I might not, like I even if I feel like I could have it all together, I don't necessarily need to project that all the time. I can actually sit in the space of the unknown, and sit in the space of not necessarily having it all together, and the vulnerability of that, and see what happens. As a fun experiment is how I take it a lot, for me to really like, tonight or this week or for a few days, I'm going to have an experiment where I sit in this kind of vulnerability and this unknown of not making everything happen.
I love it. And I'm curious if this comes up for you, but in the moments where where I ask for what I want, one of the like greatest judgments that I've had to face is the fear of being thought of as a princess, like the fear of being thought of like who are you to just ask for all of these things, like, oh, like, oh, your feet hurt, like, oh, like, just the part of me that is afraid of being thought of as selfish or entitled to my desire for comfort and pleasure. And obviously there is an extreme version of this that can go into complete narcissism and complete disconnection from reality. Yet my sense is that most of us actually need way more approval for our desire. And we're kind of living in a culture where desire is kind of like a dirty word. So to me, a big part of surrender, like, is allowing myself to be treated like a lady in the ways that us strong women have almost a disdain for, because of the way like that picture has been painted and the weakness of what that picture has looked like.
Yes, it's very challenging for me. It's why it's a vulnerable place for me not to just go make it happen. There's almost like this fear that, oh, well, he could be like, okay, well, why don't you go sit down? and that I could lose connection, and, you know, or why don't you just handle that? And that's like that's the critical voice that lives in my head, is you should not need anybody ever. Like, that is a belief system that has come up in so many different ways for me, that has been very conditioned. And it's that you should not need anyone ever, and you should be self-sufficient. And it's kind of like the dark side of both the feminist movement and then also part of the spiritual movement of like, you know, we don't need people. And I feel like attachment and attachment science is actually, it's healthy to have a type of attachment and to need people in a certain way. Mm-hmm. And it's also healthy to learn how to self-regulate and to learn how to handle your own stuff. And it depends on where we're at in the journey. And, you know, there has been times in my life where, you know, it's very interesting, is I was with a woman, and when I was with a woman as my primary relationship, what I realized is how much entitlement I actually did have. Because I was now doing all of the things that men normally did for me that I kind of expected. So being with a woman actually helped me appreciate those things more. It helped me realize that, you know, I do love being in my feminine and allowing the masculine to serve me and receiving it and giving it back, you know, giving it back in my way. But that is something that I really desire. And the entitlement of it disappeared. And now it's like, it's like I do it as the intention behind it is I'm going to give him an opportunity to show up in his masculine and serve. And I'm going to give myself an opportunity to receive that and then radiate it all over him. you know, like, allow this to be a give and take. And I think so it's like the same action of, oh, my feet hurt, could be coming from an entitled place, or it could be coming from an opportunity to keep the flow of connection and polarity happening.
I love that. What just came to mind for me is that, well, a couple of things. One is that this idea of like the princess and the prince, like one of the things that our culture is pretty much devoid of is rites of passage. You know, in like ancient cultures, like, and I know it's a generalized term, but there were rites of passage for men and women to step in from like adolescence, or like the archetype of the princess into their queen, or step from the archetype of the prince into the king. And that doesn't exist for us in commonplace ways in our modern culture. And one of the opportunities that we as men and heterosexual men and women have, should we choose to, and it's not just, it's for anyone, where I'm just speaking specifically about men and women in this context, is we have the opportunity to invite this person, this man, into his kinghood as he invites us into our queenhood. And to me, the idea of the infinity signal, this infinity symbol, occurs because the only way that we can receive is if we give. But if we are stingy with how we give, or if we are resistant to receiving because of the stories that we hold about what it means to receive from a man, or what it means to give to a man, then we're kind of like blocking that flow of really being able to invite in the type of like energy and growth and like fulfillment and nourishment that we're desiring.
I love the archetype of the king and queen, and it's a wonderful place in relationship or dating or even single.
Mm-hmm.
I'm working with someone who has, she has no prospects right now. We just started working together, and she feels like there's no good men out there. She has one of these perspectives that as women we can develop when we've been hurt, or we've had a series of experiences that haven't really given approval for the amazing men that are out there.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that we've been talking about is walking around as a queen who is calling forth the kings. And it's like a perspective to embody and live in, where we are bringing forth a particular energy by magnetizing through a magnetic place, not through a forceful action place, but actually through a magnetic place of calling forth the kings. And if you're a man, calling forth the queen by embodying your king. And we can sit in such a way that the only way that it makes sense to show up with us is in this like sort of royal kinghood.
Mm-hmm.
And that the other ways of behaving, of the disrespect and some of the things that she's experienced in the past don't exist in that field. It doesn't mean that things are still going to happen, but it shifts the experience of what it feels like to be me in my body as I'm walking around. And that is something that I think is really valuable in this, because it's easy to want to go and try to like fix and change the ways that I'm behaving. And I think before behavior shifts, it comes from an internal being place. And what are the thoughts and feelings, and how am I actually being in my body when I'm alone, when I'm in public around other people, when I'm with my partner, if you're in a relationship, and just notice what archetypes you're actually embodying, and what we're actually calling forth with that. Like, what does this way that I show up invite in my environment? Fascinating conversation.
It is, because again, cycling back to the beginning, we're inviting the perspective that things don't just happen by chance. Like, there's no isolation and experience, that our reality is a reflection of where we are at in our own process. So thank you for that. And the other thing that I want to speak to, specifically around like control, is the role that our preferences play in limiting the type of experience and relationship that we can have. So what I mean by this is like the idea of having a type, like, oh, like whether it's a certain physical type or like a certain like quality type, like, oh, I love men who are like tan with dark brown hair and green eyes, or I love bad boys, or oh, I love men who have this particular quality. But often what's happening is those types that we have are based upon relationships that have not worked out in the way that we would like most be fulfilled. So like my experience of this is, like my current primary partner is not actually my preference. Like they're like in terms of like who I would choose to be a primary partner. But because I've been willing to come in curious as opposed to being attached to my preferences, there is a depth of connection that I am experiencing because I am choosing to not be in control. And similarly with, I'm at the home of a lover of mine. And this is a man who I had a very clear idea of like, oh, like he's not the type for me. Like he would just treat me like a queen. He's such a sweetie, like it just wouldn't work. And it's almost like the piece you were talking about with surprise. Like when I feel like, oh, I've found my preference, like I know how this dynamic works, we're not making space for the magic. But it's when these people come into our lives who kind of like shake us up a little bit, or maybe they like bother us a little bit, or maybe we're just so clear that they are not the type for us, that they actually have a medicine that our like being actually really desires, but based upon our controlling idea of what relationship needs to look like or who the person needs to look like, we could actually push away this thing that might be knocking on our door and has been knocking on our door for years perhaps, but our controlling perspective has us blind to it.
I love what you're saying. It's like it's the distinction is it's the difference between writing down the literal qualities that you want in someone, like he needs to have this kind of job, he needs to look like this, he needs to live in this location, versus writing down the experience that you want to have and living and embodying the experience that you want to have, and then being open to it showing up in these surprising ways.
Mm-hmm.
And many times you're like, oh, I had no idea I needed to be with this kind of person. That, I mean, I love what you're saying. It's like that you wouldn't think is for you, that you think is outside of your type. This is what I experienced when I was with a woman. I had no idea that I would be with a woman or that I needed to do that. And she fit the criteria that I wanted to experience internally. All of the qualities that I wanted showed up in a woman. And I was like, the universe is funny. This is funny, because it was the medicine, as you said, it was the medicine that I needed at the time to really bring out this new aspect of my own femininity and understanding and appreciation for men. I knew that would come out of it and that it would show up in a woman, but we can truly have an experience that is something very different than we've ever had if we're willing for it to show up in a very different package than it ever has before. This can also bring back into relationship, being open to having an experience with your partner that you've never had before, being open to seeing them in a completely new light, that the seeing of that gives you a brand new experience.
I love it. Let's see, maybe we'll want to take some time to open it up to callers. We have a fair amount on today. So we have about 17 minutes left on the call. If there's anyone live who has a desire to ask a question or share something that really jumped out to them in this conversation, I invite you to unmute yourself and say hello.
Hi there.
Hi.
Hi, it's Joe.
Hi,
Yeah,
Joe.
Ariel, hiya. Ariel, you said something about that really struck home, and it was about the difference between, I can't remember the exact words you used, but it's something I've been trying to put into words as you were both talking, about very often as feminists, we embody this archetype of the badass woman, the strong woman. And very often that's just more patriarchy. It's more of the same, trying to fight and be strong. And like you were saying, Jamie, when you were coaching the couple and the woman said, I'm talking. And it's that kind of need to fight to be on a level playing field. But really the whole thing just needs completely turning on its head so that we come from a feminine place, like you were saying, Jamie, about how am I feeling in my body and connecting from that place, rather than this kind of fear-based approach of needing to fight to be heard and fight to be seen as an equal, strong, badass woman. It's just more of that patriarchal kind of standard of what is strength. And like you were saying, Arielle, about vulnerability, it's bravery. The two are synonymous, really. Like Brene Brown says, you can't be brave without being vulnerable. So I'd just like to see more of that, women allowing that kind of femininity, those qualities being embodied, and then that kind of coming from men too, that we can all be vulnerable and interact from how we're feeling, rather than this kind of mask of strength.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like what I'm hearing. Thank you. And what I'm hearing is kind of this, it's calling out the eye for an eye.
Yeah.
Mentality of like, oh, you've hurt me. And so that means that I can hurt you. Like, oh, like I've been wounded here, so I give myself permission to wound.
It's not necessarily an eye for an eye. It's just that, it's that kind of 70s feminism that we're fighting to be equal. But if that means being like, it's more of the same. It's more of that patriarchal kind of standard. Whereas to me, it just kind of needs to completely tilt on its axis. And, we do need to fight to be equal, but less of the fighting, less of that kind of energy,
I also love what you're pointing to. It's like fighting, yes, redefining that, and also redefining the equal. Like are we actually wanting to be equal, or are we actually wanting to be seen for who we are too?
Yeah, exactly.
And let that be different, and let it be valued. Like us be seen for who we are and that be valued, while men still get to be seen for who they are, and that is still valued. The conversation of equal is it's like we're trying to control a conversation that isn't actually the experience that we might want to have. Because many of us are women that have been fighting for that conversation, myself included, and like, oh wow, like the experience of being seen as another, as in like on the playing field as men, is actually that wasn't what I wanted. That wasn't what I wanted. And so it's interesting to kind of go back in and unpack it again and see, oh, what is it that I actually want? And is it actually equality, or is it to be seen and valued?
Yeah. It's something I'm seeing a lot. We went to see Black Panther, which is a brilliant film, but, and there's a lot of strong women in it, but they're kind of strong because they're kind of doing things that men would do, fighting with spears and being scientists. And, obviously there's a place for that, but it seems to me that the badass woman is held up with more respect than the vulnerable man, you know, and it's those qualities that I think we need to empower.
Mm. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Who else would like to bring their voice onto the call?
Hi. I
Hey
would.
there. Please.
It's Nikki.
Hi, Nikki.
Hi, everyone. I totally, completely agree with you, everything that you're saying, and I'm actually experiencing exactly that. I find it very hard to figure out when if it's abusive with a guy or it's his own, well, I guess even if it is abusive, it's his own insecurity from what's
Could you be specific with what you mean by it?
Okay. Where a guy holds back or whereas, okay, one of the people that I'm seeing right now, he kind of just like pulls himself away and not talk. And I can't figure out like what is he because we have so many of these things that, oh, he should do this, he should make sure he walks you to your car, gets you from the car, and those kind of things, and you're like, well, if he's really interested, shouldn't he be doing that? But then it's like, is he just taking advantage of the situation or just doesn't really care, or I don't know.
Yeah. I have a couple of things to say on this. So first of all, I don't know this person, and there are many different things that it could be. But one thing that comes up for me with this is the fact that we all have triggers. We all have things, like I'll speak for my, like what I'm hearing and what's coming up for me in my partnership. So one of the places that me and my primary partner are working is looking at the places where we trigger each other, like my trigger triggers him or his trigger triggers me, and how we both shut down. And in those moments when my partner is shutting down or pulling away, there's like the insecure triggered part of me that wants to like pull and like make him do it differently. And then there's the woman part, like the clear grounded part of me that wants to be aware that, oh, like a trigger is occurring right now. And how do I give approval to this man for the experience that he's having and create a space where he can actually feel safe to explore it? And this is a conversation that I have with a lot of my coaching clients who are in relationship, is when we start doing this work of like really waking up in relationship, there is a level of personal responsibility that we need to take for our own triggers. Like if we're victims of our trigger and we can't cultivate the ability to see them in the moment, it can be limiting. And to me, that's a little bit of what I'm hearing here is like, when is it the point where the relationship, quote unquote, needs to end because the people aren't able to meet from a conscious, clear space? So that's what I would say. And I'm sure Jamie has something to add in here as well.
Yes, I would also add that one question that I think is really valuable to ask ourselves when someone isn't, like, they're just not showing up the way that we would like, is, do they know that this is what I want? Do they know that my desire is to be walked to the car? And I don't know if you've gone into that, but there's, you know, some of the ways that we've talked about here on the call so far of sharing your desire as an opportunity, you know, like, oh wow, I would really love it if you would walk me to my car, and you know, just bringing it as something that you would like and seeing how someone responds to that. You know, it's interesting to to notice that. And then again, if there are desires that even sometimes might be needs, might be, you know, more of a need, and they're not being met, then like Arielle said, there's moments where it's time to look like, is this actually a vibrational, energetic match? Like, is what I'm experiencing in my body, is this work I want to do, and do I want to do it with this person? Or does it feel like, I know for myself, I felt like I ended up in relationships a lot where I felt like I was training people all the time. Like I had to do a lot of training. And that was interesting because there isn't always that I decided that I didn't want to do that anymore. I decided I didn't want to be attracting people that I was always training and they were always learning. I wanted to attract people that there was more of a give and take, and that was actually my own control issue that was attracting the people that I could train.
Yeah, totally get that. Thank you so much. Helps.
Yeah, thank you for asking.
Both of you. Thank you.
We have time for one more person, if anyone feels inspired to speak and bring their voice onto the call.
Okay, I'll step up. I have a question.
Awesome.
So, Jamie, you were talking earlier about how your feet were hurting. As a guy who's going to take a woman out, I'm going to think of, is she hungry or is she cold or warm or something like that? But I don't wear high heels. There is never a thought in my mind about if your feet are hurting. Is there like, I'm not sure the right question is there like a certain like criteria of stuff that I just need to go learn about women that I don't already know so I know to think about those things? Or is there something like, oh, in you that would say, he doesn't wear high heels, there's no way he would know my feet are hurting, so I should just ask for what I need in this situation instead of hinting around to what I need?
Yes, I would never expect a man to know that my feet are hurting. And it's not, I don't, to answer your question, I don't know that there's a list of criteria of things that you need to go learn. And it's, you know, there's a tuning to what's happening. And what happened in that experience is I said, you know, wow, I think I'd like to sit down, my feet are hurting. And then he made that happen. So he was attuned to what was happening when I spoke about it. And I think that there's kind of this energy between men and women lately that I've been seeing even more, where it's like men are sort of expected to know these certain things that they might not know. And then, and they come with this request like you have right now of, how do I know all these things so I can make sure that I please her? You know, how do I know all these things? And I think that it's very much in the moment, and being present to attuning to what's happening, and even asking questions like, you know, how are you feeling? How's this going for you? You know, I love present moment questions of like, you know, like what's happening? What are you desiring right now? You know, and actually making it like a fun present moment game, and then letting go of the expectation of self that you're supposed to know everything, like when a woman's feet are hurting or not.
And I'll add something as well. One thing, well, I agree with Jamie that I don't feel there's a list of things that you need to go out and learn. There's some very simple things that you could say to a woman that would invite her into a level of safety where she feels more ability to speak her wants and needs. Like one of, a big part of the conditioning that I needed to grow out of was, you know, having a father when I was a very young age. Parents got divorced, and whenever I expressed my feelings or my desires, I was made wrong for it. That's the story that I carried. And especially when the invalidation of women's intuition, women being called crazy for how they feel. If you as a man can say to a woman like, hey, like how you feel is really important to me, and I want you to feel safe and comfortable in speaking your needs and desires in the moment. Like creating almost like overemphasizing, and you can feel into what that looks like from woman to woman, but like really letting her know like your comfort is important to me and I invite your sharing of what you want and need.
Thank you, both of you.
I love that. Inviting permission. I think that is also, you know, for women haven't necessarily been conditioned to have permission to speak what they want. That's kind of a new piece. So I love that of, you know, inviting and letting her know that, you know, that you're on board with that and that you're okay with that. And almost in what Arielle is saying, it's like that I'm not going to think that you're an entitled princess if you tell me what you want. In fact, I'm going to enjoy seeing how I can make these things happen for you.
Beautiful. Well, we are at 1 minute to the hour, and at this moment, I would love to thank everyone who tuned in for this call. Thank you, Jamie. How can people get in touch with you if they want to learn more about your coaching work and offerings?
So the best way that I find to reach me is actually through my personal Facebook. And the link to that would be facebook.com/Miss Jamie, Jamie Elizabeth. And my website is relationshipflowstate.com. And I work with couples and individuals in unleashing their erotic potential and eliminating conflict.
Beautiful. Thank you. And for those who are interested in getting in touch with me, you can visit my website at www.ariellebrown.com. And I work both with singles and couples who are wanting to experience a level of fulfillment and freedom in how they engage in their relationships without sacrificing their greater dreams or desires. So really how to have it all and create your own design of what relationship looks like to you. So for next week, we are going to be talking about cultural taboos with women. So we're going to be talking about sex. We're going to be talking about the taboo of being with older men and exploring sexually with women. For those of you who hasn't tuned in to our Facebook event page, you can type in 6 vulnerable conversations between 2 women. And if you have specific things you'd like us to speak on, next week I invite you to post it in the comments on the Facebook event. Otherwise, thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you next Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Thank you.